Welcome to the Beyond the Call Sheet podcast series, where we interview creatives and hear their journey working in the creative arts.
My name is Emily Fitch Miller and I'm a creative fashion and art director and now content creator.
Could you tell me about your school years and were there any signs you wanted to work in fashion?
Okay, so my school years were kind of mostly fun. I was brought up in Wiltshire and then back in London, and my school years at the day school in London were kind of she can do better, but I enjoyed subjects like English literature. I loved art history and I played the clarinet and the piano. I did an amazing solo once, I remember, which I've no idea how I did it. But when we're back in London, so my parents are very creative and my mother worked in interiors and my father is a designer. And so definitely there was huge influence with them and how they had creative careers, came on us and, the kind of company that they kept and that definitely had an influence on. And my mother was very into fashion and she would take me shopping with her. We used to go to Harrods and my silly sisters had their ponies and they'd be mucking out their horses and off I'd go to London with my mother and go shopping in Harrods. So I absolutely loved retail. So my father is well known for his design legacy within retail stores, and I absolutely loved shops and shopping, and so probably really I'd say I began my career on the shop floor. So when I was about 15-16 I got a Saturday job working in one of Terence Conran had a fashion shop that was part of Habitat, and I was allowed to have this Saturday job there, and I loved it so much. I learned how to fold clothes exactly, you'd use a board and fold your sweaters. And even at the age of 16, I was allowed to do the cashing up at the end of the day. And I just loved that interaction with people on a shop floor and finding clothes for people that they loved and bought, and you put them in a bag and off they went. So definitely I'd say and I knew that I loved clothes, and there was a very significant moment. One time my mum, I went with her shopping for her, but I loved this shop that she used to go to off on Marylebone High Street, and I really wanted to not wear all those kind of bright colours, and I chose this black dress in the shop, and they were all kind of couldn't believe that I wanted black, but I very definitely knew that I wanted to wear this much more kind of sophisticated sombre colour, and that I wasn't into those more primary kind of colours that a lot of young people's clothes are made in, and people would say to me, "Oh, are you going to a funeral?" But I always felt like, why are certain colours for certain things? And I just love black and those darker colours. I think they're deeply flattering and, a real neutral for me. And to this day, my wardrobe consists of an awful lot of black. But I would definitely say that there was something there that I knew that I loved fashion. I loved going into my mother's closet. She had incredible Comme des Garçons, Yohji Yamamoto clothes, and she'd let me try them all on, and she was very, very fashion forward when she was younger.
Could you tell me about your education and what courses you took?
During my A-levels, which I did English, French and history of art, so I wanted to go and live in Paris, but through another connection of my parents, which, I was lucky that I had connections there, but they were all unpaid jobs. I got this job working at a big, at the time, fashion PR office 2 afternoons, because I was in Harley Street. I could go to her office in South Molton Street, and it was called Lindy Woodhead PR, and she did PR for kind of huge brands like Cerruti and Ferragamo, but then as the high street emerged, she did Principles, and one of the jobs that I had to do was buy her a smoked salmon sandwich, very just so, every day, very, very now everyone's talking about Devil Wears Prada. She was definitely Devil Wears Prada, but so the smoked salmon had to be very exactingly made. But one of the things that I got to do was they take the clothing samples that the fashion editors needed, so I'd get to take them to the magazine offices. So I went to Magazine House, but I went to Vogue, and one time, I have no idea, and then I went on to work there, but I have no idea why I was allowed to, because you would normally just hand them over at reception, but I was sent upstairs to the Vogue floor, and in I went with these clothes, and I was just stunned by this beautiful big white offices with glass windows all around and all these incredibly smart, amazing looking women doing this job on Vogue. And my mind just went, okay, now I know in fashion that's what I'm going to do. So I had a pathway that I wanted, and definitely it was all about Vogue, but it was about working on a magazine. I used to read magazines. I didn't quite understand how they worked, but once I'd seen these incredible offices and these women working there, I sort of felt quite like this is home and that's what I want to do. So I sort of had a plan.
What was your first break into the industry?
By now I think I'm 18, and what am I going to do after my A-levels to get into the fashion industry? And unbeknownst to my father, I didn't actually apply to university, which he was horrified about because I'd heard about this course. The only fashion course that I could find that wasn't fashion design was a course at Central St Martin's called Fashion Promotion and Communication. And I got in touch with the tutors there, and I showed them all my amazing kind of fashion dissertations that I'd done for my during my A-levels, and I had all of that kind of written work because I thought I was going to be a journalist. That's the sort of the pathway into fashion magazines. And because I hadn't done art A-level, they wouldn't take me on the course straight away. I needed to do art foundation and probably pre-art foundation because I hadn't done art A-level. All of that sounded way too long for me. So I did interview at universities, and I got a place to read English literature at Queen Mary College, which I thought would be a sort of good thing to do, because if I was going to be a journalist, I'd want to, write, and you're going to write essays and things like that. So I was sort of thinking and working out, how am I going to get there? But there definitely were none of the, incredible courses that now so many art colleges across the country run, or, Parsons in New York, all of that kind of thing. So it was really about kind of working it out myself and kind of mapping out some kind of path of, what can I do? But anyway, so I started my first year reading English literature, and was going out a lot to the Mud Club wearing my Vivienne Westwood outfits and all of these amazing fashion moments. And I was very lucky. In the summer, I got in touch with a fashion editor that I'd met when I was working at the PR firm during my A-levels, and they said to me, we need a fashion intern at Cosmopolitan. A position's come up. Would you come and work with us? So amazingly, I got this job in the summer after my first year. I'd done my first year in English at Queen Mary College, and off I went to Magazine House off Carnaby Street and got this job as an intern working at Cosmopolitan. And one of the most amazing things was that the fashion assistant, there was a fashion director called Mark Connolly, and his fashion assistant didn't love going on photo shoots. So she was really thrilled that I was happy to go on photo shoots. And that was, just the most wonderful thing, because it crystallized even more what I wanted to do with my career in fashion was not actually be a journalist. I went on these photo shoots and, kind of working with models, seeing how hair and makeup artists got the girls ready, the photographer in action. And it was the time of that kind of very kind of beautiful healthy looking models, big white teeth, very influenced by American Vogue and that kind of Elle leap that happened. And when I saw these models in action and dressing them, I was just in heaven on these photo shoots. It was just, and I was like, oh my God, this is what I want to do. And then amazingly, the fashion director there, Mark, who, I got on really, really well. I worked really, really hard. I was not paid a cent, but I worked really, really hard. I loved it. And he was offered the role as fashion director at GQ magazine that was launched, the Condé Nast were launching. And so he said to me, Emily, will you come and be my fashion assistant at GQ magazine? And so I deferred my second year, and I don't think I ever rang that university and said, I'm not coming back. And that was it. I got this job as a fashion assistant on GQ, working at, Vogue House, at Condé Nast, and that was it. That was the beginning of my career, and it's now been 38 years.
How was your experience working as a fashion assistant at the magazine GQ?
So it's now probably 1990. I do get my dates a little bit mixed up, but I was 20, and so I had this job as a fashion assistant on British GQ that Condé Nast had launched, and it was quite a heady time with, there was Arena, and then Esquire launched. There were kind of the Lads magazine sort of came up a bit later around us, but, they were really thriving, and Details had launched in America. That was the Condé Nast big menswear, huge success story at Menswear magazine. But I didn't know anything about menswear, so I just really learnt all of that on the job. But obviously we did photograph female actors, celebrities and things like that, which was great for me, because a lot of that would then come to me as a stylist. I was asked to style a lot of the female actors, and that was really exciting. And then what I made a suggestion to them that we kind of use girls within the fashion shoots, and so I was given that role as well of kind of dressing, styling and dressing, and pulling women's wear fashion that sat alongside the menswear, and we'd go on shoots and trips where we had female models, so I could sort of build up my portfolio and not just have menswear pages. But I was there for 5 years, so I had 3 different editors. But I sort of learned everything about menswear, which was fantastic moving forward as a stylist. And when later on, the fact that I could style, menswear, I could tie I could tie a Windsor knot. I knew all of the, kind of etiquette of sartorial etiquette of menswear, and that was another string in my bow as I went on to be a fashion editor and stylist throughout my career. That I had, that kind of knowledge of menswear as well. But I did try to kind of carve a bit more of a path, because I was always thinking, I want to be on Vogue, I want to move across and go on to Vogue. And I was actually offered a job. There was an amazing fashion director at the time. She was called Sarah Jane Hoare, who did incredible fashion pages. She was amazing stylist, and she heard about me, and I'd met her, and I was actually interviewed for a job with her, and she was so scary that I was a little bit kind of like, oh, I don't know. And also one of the things which is very much about my personality is that I'm very loyal. I was so grateful to Mark for giving me the job as the fashion assistant on GQ, and I was offered this job on Vogue only kind of 12 months later, and I just felt so bad that I would dump him and go across the road and be there in Vogue House, and didn't ever want people to think badly of me. So I sort of played that job down and didn't end up moving to Vogue, and carried on at GQ. And I had wonderful editor in Alexandra Schulman, who then went on to be the editor of Vogue quite famously, and she was my real champion, thank goodness, because I think I would have been a fashion assistant. I was too good at my job. I was so good at calling in clothes, doing appointments, booking my fashion director into all the shows and everything like that. I used to come in on Saturdays to do all the returns because I couldn't fit in everything. And I think this is something that I always say to younger people now as well, is like, there's a lot of hard work that goes on, and you have to be willing to do it. And so that I could do more in the week and go on showroom appointments with my fashion director and go on shoots, I would come in on the weekends and do the returns that were that I had to do, and get those done on the weekend so that I had more free time. And I just worked really, really hard, and kept working really hard. But luckily Alexandra, sort of saw my talent more, I think, and she made me assistant fashion editor and gave me a promotion and said Emily is doing her own shoots. So that was really, really exciting. And I started to do my own pages and not just assist the fashion director. And if I could kind of find some money from somewhere, you had to do your own budgets as well. But I went on trips And it was kind of funny because, say, by then I was 22, 23, and I'd be the fashion editor taking these little trips abroad. And because I was doing menswear, that would mostly just be men. We didn't really have makeup artists. You'd have a groomer, more of a kind of male hairdresser who could do a little bit of makeup should they need it. But there would be me, 22, 23, telling all these blokes what to do, and usually the youngest person on the shoot, and you know, they were really great fun, and but I was really learning on the job and just kind of making my own pathway. And I remember being very, very flattered. I became very friendly with the fashion director of Arena magazine, who's called David Bradshaw, and I totally admired and revered him. He was really good fun, but he was a fantastic stylist as well. And I remember one time styling with you know, like a kind of sports vest under a suit, pushing the sleeves back and doing Birkenstock sandals. And David rang me and was like, Emily, really cool styling. I was like, I'm overdoing shirts and ties. Let's try and break menswear fashion down a bit. And you know, it was very kind of outre for GQ. That was very much the shirt and tie kind of publication, whereas David on Arena was much cooler. You could shoot in black and white and things like that. But anyway, it was amazing, and I worked with some incredible photographers. Obviously, really learnt my craft in terms of, you know, understanding the shoot process and, you know, how, you know, camera and film and printing and developing it all, and, you know, submitting all of that back to your art department. And the greatest honour was then being brought into the art department and being allowed to look at your pages as they laid them out, and they actually asked your opinion, you know, and said, do you think this one sits with that, or we're thinking of doing a grid or something like that, and being then involved in that kind of, you know, the actual layout process was super exciting as well.
How did you evolve into becoming a fashion stylist?
So I was at GQ for 5 years, really, and it was fantastic, but really I always wanted to be a women's wear fashion editor. So I really wanted to kind of get back into women's wear fashion on a magazine, and I found it really difficult to make that sideways move into women's wear. I was an experienced fashion editor by then, and I even did interview to go backwards and be a fashion assistant on Elle magazine, and sort of got down to the last 2 and didn't get that job. So I was a little bit despairing of it, but again, you know, I sort of, okay, what am I going to do? And so I decided to leave GQ, and a really great agency called Premier said they wanted to take me on as a freelance stylist. So it was a real leap into the unknown because, you know, really it was all about being on a magazine, but I knew that I was a really good stylist, and so Premier took me on as a stylist, and I actually began working straight away with really amazing jobs. I styled for brands like Burberry and Ralph Lauren because of my background at GQ, and I started working for Next Directory, which then went on to become a 25-year-old client of mine. So, you know, in terms of being freelance, I think it's really important to, you know, the biggest sort of compliment is to have clients that come back again and again and again. And so that's always, to me, one of my, you know, sort of pats on the back, is that I kept Next as a client for 25 years. But I started going on all these incredible foreign trips, which I hadn't done so much on GQ because we didn't always have the budget. But yes, I started styling, you know, going on trips all over the world and working really well as a freelance stylist. And there weren't any freelance stylists. I mean, I think I was the only person at my agency, but there was a lot of work out there. And now, I mean, a stylist is a dime to a dozen. But then, you know, it was a craft. It was a very you know, a job that not a lot of people do people know how to make look clothes look good on set? Do people know how to prep clothes? Do people know how to go into a room and edit rails and rails of clothes into a cohesive shoot plan? Do they know how to steam clothes on a set? Do they know how to pin it? There's a lot that goes on behind the camera in terms of making you a stylist. I feel like now people say they're a stylist and it's actually more of a personal stylist in terms of maybe taking someone shopping and finding something that suits them. But a stylist on a photo shoot, it's a very, very creative role, or you might be doing not such a commercial job if you're doing something, where you're really kind of trying to, create a real image, that the photographer and the magazine have in mind. But so I was very happy doing this styling. It, freelance styling, it took off. And then because of my connections, I was very, very great friends with one of the fashion editors at GQ. He'd moved to New York and was working on a big American menswear magazine called Details. And his fashion director, I was introduced to a very famous fashion director in New York who then, amazingly, even though my portfolio was mainly menswear, I was offered a job on Mirabella magazine as a fashion editor. And so they started to get my papers together for me to work in the States. And that was the next chapter, was that I was going to go off to New York to be a fashion editor on Mirabella magazine. I mean, I was ecstatic. Things were really working out. Anyway, I got to New York and literally these papers didn't come, and then the whole magazine folded, which was a bit unfathomable because Mirabella magazine was a huge deal. It was sort of in the same league as a Vogue, and so I'm like, quickly, what am I going to do? And I went to see some agents in New York. And happily, I saw 5 agents. Every single agent wanted to take me on. And I could see straight away there was a real cachet in being a British stylist in New York, and that you were then going to bring that kind of, cool British point of view in. And I went on to live in New York for 9 years and have an incredible career there, styling, freelance styling, editorial, e-commerce, big, campaigns, music videos, TV campaigns, sort of the whole gamut. And I had an incredible agent who, really saw me as an asset, and, rather than making me pay for things or, saying, oh, I'm going to do a mailer for you and you need to pay half of it. She saw me as an asset and, kind of got, invested in me is what I'm trying to say. She really invested in me into things that then got bigger. For instance, one time I was on a shoot in Mexico and I got a booking. J.Crew wanted me to art direct a shoot for them, and I didn't have enough money. I mean, I was juggling how do you, moving countries, paying enormous rents in New York, social security, all of those, kind of building up my credit rating there. And my agent said to me, you've got to change your flight and get back tomorrow rather than 2 days later because you've got this booking with J.Crew. And I just said to her, I don't have $800 to change my airfare. Next thing I knew, I got a fax because it was a long time ago and you'd get a fax. My flight had been changed. I went on this earlier flight and I got back and I art directed this shoot for J.Crew and went on to work for J.Crew as an art director and a stylist for 3 years. So things like that were amazing. But the whole living in New York, definitely, I was really well known. I had my blonde hair, I wore camel coats, and you just have to open your mouth in the States and they were like, she knows what she's talking about. There was an incredible level of respect, not just to me as a British person, but New York was super exciting because you didn't have to fight for every budget. Like, they really got talent and creativity and what you were trying to do. And so if you said, you were, sometimes I would work with a budget that was like, $150,000, like on a hair campaign or something. And I'd say, I need 3 assistants, because you've got this setup here, this setup here. I can't be styling every setup. I can't be steaming. I can't be shopping, and they would just believe, they just, find the funds for it to be part of the budget because they understood your integrity in terms of how you were going to do the best job. And there were a few photographers in New York that I worked with, again, time and time again. And one of them paid me the greatest compliment, which was that he said, you always make me look good. So me styling well and everything being great on the styling side made him as a photographer look really good, that everything went smoothly for the client. And I was paid really well in New York. I remember one time working for Revlon and I got $4,000 and I only had to be there for 2 hours and dress Rosamund Pike in one outfit. It was good times, but I worked for sort of every major retail brand over there, like Gap, Banana Republic, Bloomingdale's, Macy's, Victoria's Secrets. And living in New York was just the brilliant times. Now everyone's reliving it again through Carolyn, Bessette Kennedy and JFK, but like literally I used to see them at down in Tribeca. I had the blonde hair and the black hairband a la Carolyn. Like that's how we dressed. It wasn't just her, but obviously there's more pictures of her than anyone else. But and there was that. What I loved about New York as well was that you could always look dressed up and sophisticated and nobody would ever say to you, oh, why are you wearing your sunglasses? Oh, you look a bit overdressed. You never were. It was kind of simple but always elevated and polished, which are words I talk about to this day. It was how I wanted to dress, and you could just really be who you wanted to be, which is kind of interesting because everyone thinks that British fashion and British, London is so unique. But actually, I feel there were a lot of rules here, and I was set free from that in New York, and just had this, excellent 9-year career in New York. And just one sad note was, so I was there for 9/11 and saw it, witnessed it all, lived through it all, and it changed my life. And that's when, and then I met my now husband, and it was time for me to come home after that.
What did you do once you moved back to London?
So I came back to London and I was offered this job as a fashion director on a newly launching magazine, and I took the role as it was a nice sort of segue back into sort of the British fashion industry. As a fashion director, you are orchestrating and art directing, you're coming up with the concepts. So you are an art director as a fashion director, but you're just styling the clothes as well. You're coming up with the concepts for the stories, for your magazine pages, but you're bringing on the talent, so you're bringing on the photographer. It's not the art direction department on a magazine that says, okay, we're going to work with Stephen Meisel. It's the fashion director who, knows who she's going to work with, who's going to execute her vision of that story, in terms of the photography. And then it's me that's bringing on the hair, the makeup. I would do all the casting, and there's a really fine line in terms of understanding what model's going to deliver on the day as well. It's really, that's really important, and that's why really well-paid models are well-paid, because they absolutely have qualities that they, and they understand how they're being photographed, what they're being asked to do, and then their features have some quality that reads incredibly in the camera. And those are kind of qualities that I recognise as a fashion director, and then took that into art direction. So for me, that was my pathway into being an art director rather than as a stylist, I'd quite often work with an art director who has been a graphic designer, say, and so they can make a beautiful layout and use fonts whose names I didn't maybe know, but I don't think they were as well qualified maybe on a photo shoot in terms of the experience, because I'd just done it week in, week out for over 25 years. So more and more I was asked to do art direction, which was really exciting for me. And what I brought into that as well is my experience and talent as a fashion editor and stylist, that I can go into a client's offices and look at their clothing for the season and understand conceptually how we might want to shoot that, but also, how those clothes are going to photograph, how we're going to put them together in terms of building the stories and making cohesive shoot plans, with the clothes, and then bringing the photographers on board. And I really sort of feel that, all those years doing photo shoots as a fashion editor and stylist, it's really about almost sort of being like, having an orchestra around you. It's about bringing the talent on set, but it's not just booking any old photographer. It's very, very specific who you bring on board the set, not only that they all get on, because if there's any arguments on set, you're not going to get magic happening and beautiful photos, but it's about understanding the talent that you're going to pull on board onto the set, in terms of then creating the pictures that you're looking to do, and so then translating that into commercial art directing, for e-commerce and websites and catalogues. Again, it's, you need a photographer who is not going to say, no, I'm not doing 15 shots today, or it became 30 shots a day as the years went on and budgets got smaller, but somebody who understands and is able to fulfill what you need them to on the shoot.
How has your work evolved into art direction and working on social media?
When COVID happened, all of my shoots, plans all just came to an end, and that was a really, really difficult time. I mean, I thought it would all kind of get going again and things would open up, but I think what happened in all those months of the lockdown was actually the way, brands' shop visuals changed. They would send clothes to models. They couldn't do any of those big shoots abroad. They couldn't do beach shoots, and they worked out different ways to shoot that maybe were kind of slightly less budget as well. So I think those ripples just kind of fed out into the industry, and the way brand shot visuals just changed, and I think I really found it difficult to find work again as a very, very experienced, well-paid art director, and wasn't really needed anymore. So, and during that time also, like many other people, I turned the camera on myself and started creating content on my Instagram, mainly kind of recommending or kind of slightly tutorial based social first content about how to put makeup on, or how I was wearing something, how I would style something, which is kind of all I knew how to do, and my Instagram grew organically, not hugely, but what I had was a point of view and a background, and I still do. I have the vocabulary to talk about why I'm wearing something, how I'm wearing something, how things should go together, and so brands started coming to me asking me to wear clothes, to show makeup, and my kind of content grew just organically like that and then another amazingly sort of happy thing has happened, which kind of has really led to my pivot into content creation, which is last year the beauty industry really sort of woke up to all of these influencers, or content creators we prefer to be called, realizing that actually who better to sell their products to the customer than the customer themselves. So I'm going to sell you, a retinol product or a beautiful ceramide product to, you know, to another woman who's in her 50s far better than any model who's, you know, shot in a studio age 19. You know, this is, you know, authentic recommendations, and a sort of, you know, peer-to-peer recommendation that people, you know, is just a huge growing industry, you know, within social first content. And so now that's what I do. I'm not art directing anymore. It's led into this sort of kind of fun pivot career. I liken it to sort of being a fashion editor again. I go to a lot of events and launches where I really like to talk about, you know, what the brand's doing, why they're launching that program, why they're launching that product. But yes, I create fashion and beauty content for mostly a midlife audience. I do have some younger followers, but it's to a midlife audience. And I hopefully feel that my content can inspire other women, you know, to feel that, you know, they still, you know, can look and feel great and dress well. And I have also created last year, that's been really a successful pivot as well. I launched an online series called Ageless Style, because I really feel that your style should not be defined by your age or the size that you wear. I am not a model size, you know, I'm size 12, I've been a 14, I've been a 10, but, you know, I think it's about understanding your body shape, and there's a lot of that kind of positive and confidence messaging you can get across through social media. And I'm also asked to do styling events in store, which is a real joy, meeting people face to face, you know, in real life. So I've kind of become this multi-hyphenate. You know, I do broadcasting, styling, content creation, live events, all sorts of different things. And so it's sort of wearing lots of different caps, and I have to be pretty organised, which is probably why I'm quite good at it to a certain extent as well. I like to be in control and working things out, but you cannot be haphazard about it. You know, I mean, I find it quite hard sort of being on my own. Some days you can not feel that motivated. You really kind of need that motivation in terms of, you know, turning the camera on yourself or saying, I'm going to do this. But there are, you know, tricks that you can have in terms of things like what's known as batch creation. So you'll set aside a day, a morning or a day to create lots of pieces of content, and then another day you'll just be editing, for instance, and then another day you set aside ongoing appointments to meeting clients and brands and things like that, rather than going, oh, I should do a bit of this, or I should shoot myself doing that, and then, you know, it's just too difficult. So you do have to kind of be quite structured in terms of what you're doing. But I feel like there's a lot of self-motivation. I'm not always sure I have that. I still find it difficult turning the camera on myself. But what I do have is I love fashion, I love makeup, I love, you know, pictures and photo shoots. So kind of taking a picture of myself, rather than concentrating that it's of myself, I'll think about, you know, the background and the lighting, and, you know, where's nice to stand, and how am I styling the clothes, and that's still kind of like a really joyful thing to do. I miss those wonderful talents and big photo shoots and the kind of camaraderie and, you know, the magic that all those people create to make, you know, these really great visuals. But, you know, even if you don't love social media, I'm sorry, it's here to stay. And, you know, there's no point kind of going, I'm just not interested. I think it can be a really positive you know, platform, and I meet wonderful people doing it again. I have some gorgeous clients, and it's just, I mean, I just feel really, really lucky that I've been able to embrace that, and it's been a huge learning curve as well. You know, I don't love being on my phone. I'm now on my phone constantly. I've had to work out, you know, how to live with phone glitches, how to edit on apps, how to, you know, do all of those technical things that I would have outsourced to a digi-op in the past. I've now got to do it all. But you know, I think it's really, really fun to kind of have this new chapter in career, age 57.
What advice would you give to any young creatives out there?
So the advice I would give to young creatives now, I know so many people want to work in the fashion industry and be a stylist, is to probably first up to just always, have humility and keep learning. It is a craft, it's an art, putting clothes together, to understanding clothes, and working with other people is a real craft. You're either good at it or not. You can't just bulldoze into every situation and say, I'm going to put her in this. You need to understand what clothes are going to be right, and work with the team in terms of, getting that the ultimate end goal. So I think it's really, really important to, always feel like there's more to learn, there's more to experience. Many years ago, when I was a fashion editor, I was asked if I could help on a shoot, which meant being a fashion assistant again, but it was to the fashion director at Vanity Fair, and it meant that I got to work on a photo shoot with Annie Leibovitz, who's one of the most famous, iconic photographers out there, and it was just the most incredible experience to see how she worked, how a huge magazine like Vanity Fair worked, which then kind of fed me, made me a better stylist. And I wasn't going to say I'm a fashion editor, so no, I don't assist anymore. And it led to something that really helped me grow in terms of my own craft. And I think it's just really important to move with the times as well, and not sit and say, no, I only do that. That's how you're going to have longevity. There's always that learning to adapt, sort of believing in yourself that there's, you do have that point of view, you have that background. And actually, in social first content, there's a real movement now into content being given, asked for from people exactly like myself, to sort of meet the experts, people with a background, a point of view, deep experience, who are being asked to, showcase brands, things, why, what do they like, what do they wear, and there's just a real upsurgence of that. And happily, that's happening to me right now, and I'm really, really delighted for that. So bring on 2026.
Thanks for watching or listening to Beyond the Call Sheet. I hope you found it interesting, and if you'd like to be notified of the next episode, then don't forget to subscribe or like. Thank you.